Welcome to the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. I'm the sports editor of the Herald Democrat, Jason De La Rosa, and you're listening to the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. We are about to enter Week 7 of the high school football season. We can officially say everybody is in district play. The last remaining few teams that either had a bye or played a non-district game last week, those times are over. We are officially in full-fledged district play. And don't look now, but playoffs are somewhat around the corner. We have people that have already played 3 district games, 2 district games, about to hit the halfway point for some of these districts. Races are shaping up. People are knowing exactly what they have to do over the final month of the season. Yes, that's right. The final month of the regular season is basically upon us. It's going by fast. The wins are coming. The losses are coming. Everybody's dealing with it, and we're going to break it all down as we look back at what happened in Week 6, and we talk about the games here in Week 7 coming up on Friday night. We will start with a team that has a bye this week, the Sherman Bearcats, as we work our way down the districts in 7-5A Division 1. They have the bye this week amongst the district teams, and they are coming off a 35-17 loss against number 3 ranked Highland Park. This was a game that was a lot closer than that final score. This was a game where Sherman was down 7-3 after the first quarter. They were down 14-10 at halftime, and they were down 20-17 late in the third quarter. They were hanging tough. Now, this was a game that was moved from Friday to Thursday because of the potential impending weather that never ended up causing a problem. Although the funny part about that is they moved the game to 5:30 on Thursday, and they got a weather delay trying to play early, so they actually had to sit around for about 45 minutes before they could kick off. And so who knows if any of that had sort of a factor. But the simple fact is that the Bearcats were able to stay with one of the top-ranked teams in the state, and Highland Park ended up getting a touchdown late in the third quarter to build up a 28-17 lead going to the fourth quarter, and they added on another one there to make the final score. But if you were Sherman, that's exactly how you wanted those 2.5 quarters to play out, or 2.5 and 3 quarters of a quarter. You were right there. It's a one-possession game. Sherman had their chances. They were aggressive. They onside/squib kicked, trying to get some extra possessions out of it. Going for it on 4th and goal, not settling for a field goal. They ended up getting a touchdown out of that decision to keep the pressure on Highland Park. Highland Park was just able to make a couple more plays and have a looks like a comfortable win in the end. Phoenix Grant led Sherman. He had 19 carries for 65 yards, 2 touchdown runs. Caleb Thompson had a touchdown run. He had 12 carries for 40 yards. Dane Castleberry also kicked a 29-yard field goal to account for the points there. And I'm sorry. Thompson only had the 12 carries for 40 yards. And then receiving-wise, Elijah Chapman had 4 catches for 56 yards. Aries Jones had 5 catches for 42 yards. Zachorian Harris added 4 for 36 as well. Those kind of spreading the ball around to try to make things happen. Grant finished 20 of 31 for 179 through the air, and that's how things shook out for the Bearcats in their game. So they are sitting at 3-3 overall and 1-1 in the district standings. They are currently tied with McKinney North at 1-1. There are still 3 undefeated teams in the district. Longview is 2-0, and both Tyler and Highland Park are 1-0. That game made Highland Park 4-1 overall and 1-0 in district play. This week has Longview going to Highland Park So it's probably, if it's not the biggest game in 5A or / the state, it's one of them. Because you have number 3 Highland Park against number 4 Longview. Longview's 5-1 and 2-0, and that is who Sherman is going to be going on the road to play next week. So this is, of course, a very interesting matchup for the Bearcats. We saw what they did against Highland Park. It will be interesting to see what Longview does going on the road to have to come play at Highland Park. And like I said, one of those teams is going to get their first loss. So we will see how things shake out and what that may mean for Sherman's matchup at Longview next week. And so far, the standings are still what we thought they would be. Sherman tied with North. That is a game that is coming up on the schedule. I believe that's the game that's after. That's going to be in 2 weeks, or 3 weeks, I guess, technically from now. Sherman will play. Oh, no, that is in 2 weeks. I was right. I was looking at the wrong date. So after Sherman plays Longview, that's going to be here at Bearcat Stadium. North will be coming here. North has Highland Park next week, so you would assume that they would lose that. So there's a chance potentially that, depending on what McKinney North does, McKinney North has Wiley East this week. So that will be a game, obviously, that Sherman's going to have an interest in to see where they stand. But ultimately, when those two face off at Bearcat Stadium October 22nd, there's a pretty good chance that the winner of that will be looking to gain sole control of a spot either for third place or for fourth place in the standings. Wiley East and West Mesquite are both 0-2 at this point, so they're a little off the pace, and they're gonna need to pick it up. West Mesquite has a big game against Tyler this week to kind of see where they're at. There's a chance they drop to 0-3, and that's who Sherman ends with. So there's a chance maybe for West Mesquite that game might not mean a lot for them depending on how things go, especially this week because before we get to that West Mesquite Sherman game, West Mesquite also has to play Highland Park. So that could potentially be they could be looking at a 1-4 record before they get to that game at the end of the season. So I don't think anything has really changed in what people thought. The 5 teams for 4 spots are probably the same 5 teams. Sherman gets to rest up for Longview, see how things shake out, and then we'll talk about their game against Longview and what that may potentially look like when we get back into the podcast next week. Moving down to District 7 5A Division 2, the Denison Yellow Jackets will be hosting Lake Dallas. Again, 7 o'clock start for all Denison games, so always be aware of that when you head out to Munson Stadium. Denison is 4-1 and 2-1 in district play. They won last week 43-24 against Frisco Memorial. And Lake Dallas is 3-3 overall and 1-3 in district. They came up short in a defensive struggle. They lost 14-12 against Princeton last week. So if you're looking at the district standings, the top 4 teams that we have said all along are in those 4 spots. Lovejoy and Frisco remain 3-0. Frisco Liberty is 3-1 after they lost to Frisco last week. And Denison is at 2-1. That win over Memorial, like we talked about, gave them sole possession over Memorial for 4th place. Memorial is in 5th at 2-2 in district play, and everybody else has the 3 losses: Rock Hill, Lake Dallas, Princeton, and Lebanon Trail. So Denison has a 2-game lead on those schools, and Lake Dallas is one that they'll be playing this week. And technically, you could say they have a 2-game lead over Memorial because if those 2 were to tie for 4th place, Denison would have the head-to-head tiebreaker. So as we hit the home stretch, Denison is in a really good place. One, just to make the playoffs. They will still play Princeton and Lebanon Trail, who are a combined 1-6 in district, to come, and they also have the games against Frisco and Liberty, who are essentially either tied with them in the loss column or right ahead of them. So there's a chance that they could potentially move up into that 2nd spot. Obviously, Lovejoy would have to lose 2 games to give Denison any chance to get the top spot in the district standings because Lovejoy is Denison's lone loss. So they would have head-to-head if they were to both finish 7-1 in the standings. But Denison does obviously have a realistic shot at getting the second seed / second place, depending on how they do against Frisco and Liberty coming up. But they have Lake Dallas ahead of them, and this is an improved Lake Dallas team over last year. They won just one game last year. They really struggled to score, and they did not win a district game. They finished last in the standings. They are better, obviously. They've already won 3 games. They have a district win under their belt. So and just like last week's score says, they were competitive against Princeton in a game that came down to the wire that they were unable to pull out. And they have shown a little more life compared to the group that we saw last year. Their win was against Lebanon Trail. They won that one 56-32. And then the losses, they lost to Frisco 70-27. They lost to Frisco Liberty 41-24, and then they lost, like we mentioned last week, to Princeton 14-12. So in 2 of the 3 games, they gave up a bunch of points in those losses. And then last week obviously was the outlier to that, so maybe they figured some things out. This was a game last year that Denison won 56-34. They're going to have to worry about the quarterback, Brendan Sorsby. He's a dual threat guy. He's thrown for a bunch of touchdowns. He's ran for a bunch of touchdowns. He leads them in rushing. So it's going to be an interesting matchup because the last 2 Denison games, even though this score may not look like it has come down to the wire. They have had to make plays in the fourth quarter, and this last week was no exception. Even though they got off to a great start with Jadarian Price returning the opening kick, 105 yards. That's a school record for the longest play by a Denison Yellow Jacket. He took the opening kickoff. That broke the kickoff record by 3 yards, and it broke the overall record, which was Keelan Vaughn's interception return last year against Lovejoy. That was 103 yards, so he beat that by a couple yards as well. And it was looking good early on. Denison had a 63-yard touchdown throw from Caleb Hevner to Josh Kurtenbach. And then the next play of the first play of the ensuing Memorial possession was a sack fumble at the goal line that William Wallace recovered in the end zone. So Denison was up 20-7. Memorial had their quarterback get hurt on their first drive, so they went from a senior to a freshman, and it looked like they were going to be able to gain control of that, but Memorial hung around, and it was only a 21-17 game going into the fourth quarter, and that's where Denison kind of wore Memorial down, did a lot of their damage on the ground. Price ended up finishing with 17 carries for 100 yards. And that's after having 4 carries for 4 yards at halftime. So obviously a majority of his yardage came in the second half. Jack Allman had and Price had a touchdown in the fourth quarter. Jack Allman had 6 carries for 39 yards. One of those was a touchdown run to kind of get things started there in the fourth. And then Trey Rhodes had a touchdown catch to really put the game away middle of the fourth quarter. Memorial did absolutely next to nothing in the second half. They kicked a field goal in the third quarter. And they got a 9-yard touchdown run that was a one-play drive because of a long kickoff return. Outside of that, there was a lot of 3 and outs. Memorial, barely finished with 200 yards when all was said and done. But again, that's a game where Denison goes into the fourth quarter. It's only a 4-point game. They had the game 2 weeks ago against Rock Hill where they were trailing with 2 minutes to go. They had to make some plays, and so that's the good part of it, is that you're seeing a team that when they have to make plays, when they have to go score a touchdown, when they have to get a stop to keep somebody from scoring, they've been able to do that. You obviously would not want to have that much excitement. But again, when you look at the final score and you see 43-24, that is a healthy win. But it does make you wonder, do teams see that, what they've done against Rock Hill and Memorial, and think, hey, we can play with them? They're not blasting people from the start to where they're down they're up 3 or 4 touchdowns in the middle of the second quarter, and people are unable to come back on them. So it will be interesting to see if Denison can get off to maybe a little bit of a faster start and maintain that when they host Lake Dallas and try to get to 5-1 and 3-1 in the district standings on Friday night. Next up, we have the Van Alstyne Panthers hosting the Crum Bobcats in the District 4-4A Division II opener. As we might remember from last year, this is a small district. This is a 5-team district out there in Region 1, and so there are only 4 district games for everybody to play. So they are finally getting underway, and this is 5-1 Van Alstyne against 4-2 Crum. This should be a somewhat interesting district this year, especially because out of the 5 teams, the worst record is Crum and Sanger at 4-2. Salina is 4-1. They are ranked in the state. They're number 3 in the state, and Aubrey is off. The defending district champs are off to a 6-0 start, and Van Alstyne's sitting there at 5-1. So everybody in this district probably thinks, hey, we're good enough to make the playoffs. All you have to do essentially is win 1 game in this district because there's only 5 teams and there are 4 playoff spots. So I think this has a chance to be a very spirited race, much like it was last year, because there's so few games and every game can really flip the standings. And this matchup that we're going to talk about is no exception because last year Van Alstyne won this game 43-13, and it was the reason that Van Alstyne was able to make the playoffs in their first year in 4A because that was their only district win. Crum did not win a district game, and so that was the difference. If the scores had been reversed, Crum would have gone to the playoffs. But this is a better Crum team. Last year they went 2-6. They're already 4-2, so they have shown improvement. But Van Alstyne has shown improvement as well. They are 5-1. This was a team coming into this game last year that only had 2 wins. Ended up finishing the regular season at 3-7, and then lost the bi-district game. So they were 3-8 last year. They're already 5-1, with a chance to go to 6-1 after they beat Bullard last week, 24-6. A little bit of a struggle for Van Alstyne. It's probably the first time that they had really dealt with some issues penalty-wise. And scoring-wise, because they had scored in the 40s in all their wins, and even the game that they had lost against Anna, they scored 35. So this is obviously a season low for points, but it did not matter. They nearly got a shutout of Bullard. Bullard scored in the fourth quarter to get on the board, but 5 turnovers forced by Van Alstyne. 3 of those were interceptions by Dakota Howard, who also returned 47 yards for a touchdown. Diego Hernandez kicked a field goal. And Gavin Montgomery and Jaden Mahan had touchdown runs. It was not a very pretty win. Van Alstyne, ran 30 times for 63 yards, only had 162 yards passing. But the turnovers were the difference. They were able to keep Bullard off the board for 3 quarters. And I think that's a sign of a good team. Things are not going your way. You got to make the most of your opportunities, and they were able to do that. And I think that, they're probably going to look to be that in similar fashion against Crum. I think both sides know this is the key. This is the first real key matchup to see who might get the playoff spot. If you're just comparing, like I said, the scores from last year, Sanger has the bye, and then Aubrey's going to play Salina. So that's a big matchup right off the top to see who wants to stake their claim as the top seed in the district. So we'll see what happens when Van Alstyne hosts Crum on Friday night. We move now down to the 3A ranks, and we will start there in District 4 3A Division 1, where we have a matchup of 2 of the 3 first-place teams as Whitesboro travels to Brock. This is Whitesboro, who is 3-2 overall and 2-0 in district play, taking on Brock, who is 5-0 and 2-0 in district play as well. Both teams off to the solid start in district play. Also tied in first place is Pilot Point. So we will see what happens with those Bearcats. They take on Paradise this week, so obviously the winner is going to be in first place either by themselves or still tied with Pilot Point. And, of course, that could set up an interesting matchup over the next couple of weeks because you have a schedule that has both of them. Sorry about that, folks. I had a dog that wanted to pay more attention to what's going on, not in a podcast, than recording a podcast. So I apologize for a slight intermission that I had to take there. But as I was saying, Whitesboro and Brock play this week, and the winner of that's going to be tied with Pilot Point, and that is who Whitesboro will host next week. So obviously a key 2-game stretch here for the Bearcats as they try to make their way back to the playoffs. Brock and Pilot Point don't play until the last week of the season, so there's a chance they could be on a collision course if Brock and Pilot Point both win, find a way to win out to set up a district title match. But Whitesboro is going to try to pull an upset on Brock. Brock is state ranked. Brock is Brock. They've been really good. They are the defending district champs. They have not lost a game. They have not lost a district game since 2019. I believe they are on a 14-game. I think it's 14-game. 14 straight district games. And of course they're playing at home. So there is that. Whitesboro is coming off a 36-14 win against Boyd to get to 2-0. That was a game we talked about last week that they had lost after beating Ponder. So Whitesboro is already one win ahead of schedule based on last year when they missed out on the tiebreaker. So that's a I don't want to say a big win because Boyd is at the bottom of the standings. But like I said, you got to beat those teams to get in and to avoid a situation where you might have to deal with a tiebreaker. So that was definitely a good win for Whitesboro. And they were down 14-8 after the first quarter, and then Boyd did not score again. Obviously, if they lost 36-14. So a very good defense by Whitesboro over the final 3 quarters. And they did a lot of their damage to the passing game. The combo of Mac Harper and Clay Hermes was 27 of 35 for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. Harper was 21 of 27 for 229 and all 3 of the touchdowns. He connected with Asher Contreras for the first touchdown, and Contreras finished 20 carries for 94 yards to lead the way on the ground. And then he had another one to Jake Hermes, who had 6 catches for 84 yards and that touchdown. And then the third was the first one to Jay Sanders. Sanders finished with 7 catches for 44 yards. Sean Shares added a couple of touchdown runs in the second half as Whitesboro was able to pull away after leading 15-14 at halftime. So strong second half, strong defensive effort. They came up with 5 turnovers, 4 interceptions. So a very strong start by Whitesboro to get off to the 2-0 start. Ponder, Bowie, and Boyd already have the 2 losses. So it's going to come down, if you take care of business against them, it's going to likely come down to what it did last year, Paradise and Peaster. Last year Paradise had the tiebreaker over Whitesboro, and that's what the difference was. You're going to have to find a way to win probably both of those games if you want to guarantee at least third place / avoid a potential tiebreaker with the team that you do not beat. So, but Whitesboro's off to a good start. Especially because they had that little dip there. They won that opener against Bells. And then they ended up going 1-2 in non-district play. But they're 2-0 now in the games that matter. And that's all you can ask for when you've only played 2 games. So we'll see what Whitesboro and Brock have in store on Friday night in District 4 3A Division 1. Moving next door to District 5 3A Division 1, we will start. Which one do I want to start with this week? We'll start with Howe. The Bulldogs will be traveling to Emory Rains for their district matchup. This is 0-5 Howe, who is 0-2 in district play after they lost 70-17 against Winsboro. And Emory Rains is coming off a lopsided loss as well. They are 1-3 and 0-2 after losing 45-0 to Pottsboro, who we will of course talk about in a minute. So Howe, again, struggling. They have lost 17 games in a row, and this is basically, for all intents and purposes, a elimination game in this district. You already have two teams that are off to 2-0 starts: Pottsboro, Mount Vernon, and Mineola, and both Bonham and Winsboro are 1-1. Commerce is the other 0-2 team. Obviously, the loser of this is going to be 0-3, and if you are going to get in the race, you're going to have to get on your horse because you're not going to have a lot of games to make up. You're probably going to have to win out just to be able to get to 4-3, and even that might not be good enough to get you in. So, going to be interesting to see what Howe can do against a team that has also had its struggles. Like I mentioned last week, so Pottsboro shut them out 45-0, and when they have lost. That is the line of demarcation. In all three games that Raines has lost, they've allowed at least 45 points. So I don't know if that's a good or a bad number that you have to get to beat them. Again, this last week, Howe has done a lot of their stuff offensively through the passing game. Was a little chopped up this week. Austin Haley threw for 178 yards and a touchdown, and then Caleb McNutt got some late work at quarterback, and he also had a touchdown pass. A 60-yarder to Ethan Lopez. Cooper Jones had the touchdown pass from Haley. He had 8 catches for 118 yards. But Howe really struggled on the ground. They only had they really struggled to get things going on the ground. So they had 28 carries for 21 yards. So it's like we've said with Howe. Coming off last season, things are better. I know a score like this does not necessarily show that, but they have had some moments. I think obviously they've played, opening with Pottsboro last week, I think they've played 2 of the 4 teams that are probably playoff teams, and so the question is coming up, when you have a team like this with Emory Raines, when you have a Commerce, who they host next week, when you play a Bonham, can you beat those people to kind of get in the mix maybe for that 4th spot, when it comes down to the end of the season, can you be in that mix? It's a very tough district, but there have been some of those flashes we've seen from Howe in some of the non-district action, some close games that could have ended that streak, and I'm sure that's weighing on them. You just want to get that one win, just get that win, get it out of the way. And maybe the floodgates can open, but so they're coming off a tough loss. I want to say this is a winnable sort of game. I think these teams are somewhat similar, even though Raines does have a win. But we'll see what happens with that. And you never know with the road trips that these teams have to make in this district, for sure. But Howe will be at Emory Raines on Friday night. And the other game in this district, the Pottsboro Cardinals going on the road as well. They will be traveling to Commerce. This is 2-2 Pottsboro, 2-0 in district play against 1-4 Commerce, who is 0-2 in district play. Like we just mentioned, Pottsboro won 45-0 against Emory Raines, and Commerce lost 63-22 against Mount Vernon. The one common thread so far for Commerce is that after allowing 76 points against Bonham in the district opener, they gave up 63 points last week. So I guess the expectation would probably be that Pottsboro should be able to put up a big number here as well. This was a game, for those that don't remember, last year did not get played. This was a forfeit because the district did not have no contests in place. It was either a win or a loss, and Commerce actually forfeited 3 of their district games. This was one of them. They also canceled the non-district games. So they had to deal with some a lot of COVID-19 cases. So there is we can't look at last year as a comparison and say, oh, this was the score last year, that sort of thing. They didn't play. Pottsboro has won 6 straight against Commerce. So that's a good side to be on. And Pottsboro obviously is playing better. They started off with those 2 losses like we've talked about. Obviously losing to Gunners is not a bad loss by any means. And the shootout against Community to open the season, obviously that's a 4A team. It's a bigger program than Pottsboro. And that was a close game to the end. They weren't able to pull that out. And they got in the district. They beat Howe. Almost got to 60 against them. They put up 59 against Howe. Won that game 59-14, and then of course 45-0 this past week. So we were worried about the 3-week layoff for Pottsboro. Obviously, it did not affect them. And they're rolling. And this is another one of those games. If you want to be in that mix, you're going up against a team only has 1 win, has given up a ton of points in both the district games. If you want to keep pace with some of these other people, if you're tied in first place with a Mount Vernon and a Mineola, you've got to keep pace with them. And this is a game that you probably should win. I'm sure you think you can win. And when you're coming off a game like you had last week, you hold an opponent to under 150 yards. And that's without turnovers, so that's just legit, stopping them with whatever plays that they're running. And then offensively, Major McBride had 13 carries for 147 yards and a touchdown. Jet Carroll was 9 of 11 passing for 107 yards and a touchdown, and he also ran 13 times for 74 yards and a score. Haylen Flanagan. Carroll had 2 touchdowns. I forgot about that second one there. First one was to Jake Kubik. The second was to Reed Thompson. He also, Thompson being the also, had a 42-yard punt return for a score, and that was a pretty dominating performance. That's 2 weeks in a row. It seems like Pottsboro's found their groove, and they're going to look to keep that going when they travel to Commerce, especially like I said, because coming up, Mineola is making a visit from East Texas next week, and then you have a game against Bonham, which again that's probably a game that you think you should win. And then of course they end with that Mount Vernon Winsboro gauntlet. So it's gonna be a tough month, especially towards the end of it for Pottsboro. And if you're gonna keep pace to try to at least lock up a playoff spot, these are the games you have to win. Even if you're going on the road to kind of keep pace. So we'll see what Pottsboro can do when they go to Commerce on Friday night. Next up in District 8-3A Division 2, let's see, who do we want to start with this week? I think we'll start with, since 3 of the 14, that's right, yeah. Well, you know what? Let's start with Whitewright at Lone Oak. I think that's the best place to start. So Whitewright is 2-4 and 1-1. They get the win last week. Get off the schneid. They had a 4-game losing streak, and they were able to get a 31-13 win against Blue Ridge. And Lone Oak lost against SNS, so we'll talk about them probably at the end of this because they have the bye this week. But Lone Oak lost 21-20 against SNS. Much needed win for Whitewright if they were going to get into the mix. Obviously, they opened with Gunner. If you assume everybody is going to lose to Gunner, we'll talk about them in a little bit, that you've got to beat some of these other people that think they're in the mix, and they were able to do that against Blue Ridge, so they're on the same path to have their games be meaningful the rest of the way through. Caden Caraway was the leader in this one for the Tigers. He had a hand in all of the touchdowns. He had 23 carries for 137 yards and scored 3 touchdowns. And then he was only 8 of 17 passing, but it was for 189 yards. Really big chunk plays in the passing game for the Tigers. And he had a touchdown pass to Maverick Sartain, who had 5 catches for 128 yards. Whitewright was up 14-0 after the first quarter, took that into halftime. And they were able to tack on some points in the fourth quarter to break the game open. Allison Peck kicked a field goal. Caraway had a touchdown run, and that fashioned the final score. Blue Ridge didn't get on the board until the second half. So that was a crucial one. The winner of that was going to be in a good spot. The loser was going to be 0-2, and that ends up being Blue Ridge's situation as they try to battle back. We'll talk about them here in a second. Lone Oak had a tough game. They had a 20-7 lead going into the fourth quarter, and they weren't able to pull that out. And that was a game last year that they, I'm thinking they think they're better. They are better because they went just 1-9 last year, and they are already 2-3. So I think they thought that was obviously a winnable game for them against SNS. They weren't able to pull that game out, and so now that was their opener. They had the bye the first week, so they're just sitting at 0-1. So they're not in a must-win mode just yet. But if they get to 1-1, obviously they have everybody coming up on their schedule, so they will control their own destiny. If they lose this one, drop to 0-2, they'll already be behind two teams that they will be chasing to try to get one of those playoff spots. So this is going to be interesting for Whitewright. Like I said, they had struggled. They had some close games. They weren't able to win them before getting into district play. And then obviously when you open with Gunner, that's asking a lot of anybody. Somebody had to do it, and they got the short straw on that one, I guess. But you get them out of the way, and then if you can take care of business against the other people, then you have your games mean something. That's what Whitewright did last year. In a sense, they beat Blue Ridge last year. They won this game last year 36-7. Have a chance to go into their matchup against SNS next week at 2-1. And that was a game they lost last year, and that ended up being one of those swing games in terms of a playoff spot. And of course, even if they were to lose again, they would be in a position where that last game against Leonard would potentially mean something. Of course, the game last year not get played because COVID-19 at Whitewright, and Leonard went to the playoffs instead. But the path is right there for Whitewright. They got to take care of business like they did last year against Lone Oak. We'll see if they can do that on Friday night as those standings over in 8-3A Division II take shape. I will mention SNS since we just talked about Lone Oak, kind of talked about their game there. They were able to start 2-0 in district with that victory, so that was a huge win to come from behind. We talked about going into last week when they took on Blue Ridge. They were seeking their first win. They hadn't had a whole lot of success in the non-district portion of their schedule. They were able to get that win, holding off Blue Ridge 17-14, and this one was closer than that one. Like we said, it was 21-20. SNS is down 20-7 going to the fourth quarter, and they get 2 Chase Sloan touchdowns in the fourth quarter to pull out that game 21-20. Sloan actually scored all 3 of the touchdowns. He had 16 carries for 73 yards. SNS really took it to Lone Oak on the ground, so if that's something to pay attention for Whitewright. SNS ran the ball 50 times out of 62 plays. They gained 334 yards. Coda Richardson had 17 carries for 132 yards. Josh Pittner had 15 for 119. SNS only threw it 12 times. Richardson was 5 of 12 for 76 yards. Did hit a couple big plays, but it was mostly with the ground game. They were able to grind out a win. And they're 2-0 for the first time since 2015. Gunner and SNS are the only undefeated teams, because we'll talk about Bells' loss to Gunner last week coming up here in a second. And they are, much like we mentioned with Whitesboro, they are ahead of schedule based on what they did last year, because last year they lost. SNS lost to Blue Ridge and then turned around and beat Lone Oak, so they were 1-1 at this point. So they've already got a game in hand in what is probably going to be a decently tight race, at least for the third and fourth place. But they're sitting pretty right now on a bye. They're going to see what happens with everybody else in this district. I think they are probably looking at. I don't know if they're cheering for. I assume they're cheering for Lone Oak to beat Whitewright, but either way, they have to face Whitewright next week. That's who they're going to play. That's who they're going to play next week at Whitewright. It's going to be on the road. And Bells is playing Blue Ridge. I assume that and we'll talk about that game in a minute. I assume they think that Bells is going to win that game, and Leonard and Gunner play. We'll talk about that game in a minute. I think they assume that is going to go that way. That's going to go Gunner's favor as well. So you're going to have potentially three teams. You could have SNS with a 2-game lead over three of the teams in the district. So I think that's a good spot for them. But they're going to have to win. The White game is going to be probably a swing game next week, at least potentially for seeding. And SNS got the third seed last year because of that. And they just have had a knack for winning these close games. A lot of their games last year were close in district. And so far the 2 wins this week. It doesn't matter if you win them by 50 or 1, as long as you win them. They all count the same, in the standings. And it's better to have an ugly win or in a come from behind, comeback scenario like they did, than to lose a game, even if you played well. Because district wins are what matter the most, and they mean so much, especially in this district when I think everybody knows that we're chasing Gunner, but just based on what they've done, what they had coming back, and what they've already shown this year, that it's going to be tough to knock them off, let alone probably score on them just because of the way they're going, and we'll talk about them here in a second. So, but we'll see. SNS will see what happens as they wait for these other matchups, and the next matchup of games that is being played is Bells making that trip to Blue Ridge. You have Bells at 3-3 and 1-1 after they lost 41-14 against Gunner, and Blue Ridge is coming off that 31-13 loss against Whitewright. They are 1-5 and 0-2, and this is probably a must-win for Blue Ridge. You drop to 0-3, and you've lost to your 3 of your 4 main contenders for a playoff spot. You still have Gunner on the schedule. So if you're 0-3, you probably are looking at 0-4, and so this is as must win as you could probably get for Blue Ridge, which won their opener against Collinsville, and they haven't won since. And they haven't scored more than 14 points in any of those losses. So that's something to note as the Bells defense tries to deal with them. This game was a semi-shootout last year. Bells won 53-34. I don't know how close we're going to get to that, at least from a Blue Ridge perspective, just because they've sort of struggled. Bells is coming off a game. If you could feel good about playing Gunner and losing 41-14, Bells might be feeling that as much as possible. No team had scored more than 1 touchdown against Gunner, and Bells scored twice. That was another one of those games last week that got moved from Friday to Thursday just because of the threat of the bad weather and obviously being a pretty key district game. I think everybody kind of figured the winner of that would be in first place. It would be the district champ or have the inside track to that, and the loser is probably the second best team in this district. I don't think they wanted weather to affect the outcome either way. And have that, have adverse conditions play a factor. So they moved it up to Thursday. Gunner was up 21-0 at halftime. Bells got their points in the second half. It was a grind them out game for them. They had 54 carries and only 209 yards. And they don't pass obviously, but the one pass they did complete went for -4 yards. So they weren't going to get a whole lot of help with their air game. Spencer Hines led the way. He had 18 carries for 64 yards and a touchdown. Caden Pyle had 4 for 43 and the other touchdown. Bo Baker had 9 carries for 42 yards. Brock Baker had 12 for 21. So Gunner did what they normally do. Bells was able to have a little more success just based compared to what other people have done against Gunner. And I think they have the win over Leonard. And we'll talk about them next because that's who Gunner plays. But I think they know what is at stake for them the rest of the way. As long as they take care of their business, I think they've potentially played the other 2 best teams besides them in the district standings. Although SNS may have something to say about that if they find a way to get into that matchup. I'm going to pull up the schedule real quick to see when those 2 guys would play. As I scroll down and look, that's in 2 weeks. So if SNS beats Whitewright next week, you're looking at a 3-0. You're looking at a 3-0 SNS going to Bells on October 22nd against a potentially, I guess that would be a 4-1. They'd be 4-1 because they play. Bells plays Blue Ridge and then Lone Oak. So I guess that'd be 3. Yeah, they'd be 3-1. So that because Bells has the bye at the end. so they're going to be a game ahead, and that would be essentially the swing game. Whoever wins that would pretty likely be the second place team, second seed for the playoffs, and the other one would be third. So Bells knows what's in front of them. We know how they're going to do it. They're going to run. And they, like I said, I think they've gotten the two other best teams in the standings out of the way. Of course, results along the way may change that, but they know what they need to do when they go to Blue Ridge on Friday night. And then the last game in this district, 8-3A Division II, Gunner and Battle of Tigers. Gunner will be hosting Leonard. This is 6-0 Gunner, who is 2-0 in district play after their win against Bells, 41-14. And Leonard is coming off their bye. They didn't play last week, so they're 3-1 overall and 0-1 in district play because they opened with Bells, and that was a game that they lost 37-29 2 weeks ago. So if you want to play the transitive property game, you have Gunner beat Bells 41-14, and Bells beat Leonard 37-29. So you can do the math on that and see what you think this spread would be for a Gunner-Leonard matchup. We did mention when your worst performance is allowing 2 touchdowns, then you're having a really good season, and of course Gunner is. They still have not allowed the defense has not allowed an offensive touchdown in the first half of a game so far this year. They are allowing less than a touchdown per game, and of course they were able to do what they typically do offensively, even though they have had a couple guys banged up. Ethan Sloan has been out, Cole Lemons has been out. They're hoping that they'll be back this week, depending on how things go with their recoveries. But in the meantime, plenty of options, plenty of guys to spread the ball around to, and of course it all starts with Hudson Graham. The quarterback had 17 carries for 95 yards and ran for 3 touchdowns. Only had to throw 7 times, was 5 of 7 for 61 yards. Did have a touchdown pass, also had an interception. Ivy Hellman had the touchdown catch. He had 2 catches for 44 yards. He also ran for a score. He finished with 12 carries for 84 yards, and Ashton Bennett had 7 carries for 86 yards and a touchdown to round out the scoring for Gunner. Not much more you can say at this point. If you want to give Leonard a chance in that they have a great athlete, we've talked about him. It seems like for 4 years now, probably because we have. At quarterback for Leonard is DJ Brown, Division I caliber athlete, hasn't committed anywhere, but he has that talent, and he is the quarterback, so the ball's going to be in his hands every play. And if a guy like that can make some things happen, maybe Leonard can have designs of keeping it close for a while. But Gunner has just has really destroyed people. The only thing that's really hurt them in keeping these scores as close as they are is they have a bit of a turnover bug in some of their closer games, and that's probably something you say, well, we need to clean that up by the time the playoffs get here. But so far in the regular season, it's been really hard to keep pace with them. And Leonard has never beaten Gunner, so there is that fun fact. In 15 all-time meetings, Gunner is undefeated against Leonard. In the last 3 times they've played, Leonard has not scored more than 8 points. So there is that as well. Last year this game was 29-8. So like I said, maybe if you're Leonard, you can hope to keep it something like that, and maybe you can score another touchdown or 2 and try to get into the mix there. But I think that'll be an interesting score to watch as well, because if you're Leonard, you've already lost potentially, like I said, with Bells. You've probably already played the 2 best teams that you're going to play before you hit your home stretch. And so you may be 0-2, but there's a really good chance that you finish potentially with 4 wins, or that's your goal is, hey, we can go 4-2 and get 3rd place based on the schedule that we have coming up. So I think that might be what Leonard's feelings are after they go to Gunner on Friday night. We will hit the small schools. I'll mention very quickly the one team that is on the bye is Texoma Christian. They dropped to 0-6 and 0-1 in their district opener after they lost to Prestonwood North, 59-14. So they're a little bit better offensively than they had been, so that's good to see. But obviously not good enough to get a victory. So they are 0-1. They have the bye this week in their district, and they'll return to action when they host Azo Christian next Friday. It's a little bit of positives. Some guys got back healthy this week, and I think they've got a chance to maybe work on some stuff and try to get back in the mix. It is like I said, it's hard to tell when you look at these standings because some people just played their first district game. Some people have already played 3. So it hasn't really had a chance to even out yet. But I think if TCS can get a couple wins, they might be able to get in the mix in the home stretch. But I think at this point there's hopefully trying to get better and offensively it was their best outing in a couple weeks. Getting to the 14, and hopefully they can continue on that positive stretch. And maybe can make some noise in that district over the final month of the season. And so we'll go down to 5-2A Division 1. This is a district that is kicking off district play this week. And we have, I think, I think there's a little something about all 3 of these matchups. I think the most interesting of the matchups is Tioga hosting Trenton. You have Trenton, who is 3. Now, none of these... almost none of these teams did not play last week. Almost everybody took the bye. Both Trenton and Tioga did not play. They both had the bye. So Trenton is 3-1. Tioga is 2-3. This was a game last year that Trenton won 45-6. But as we've talked about with Tioga, you cannot look at scores from last year, and here's why. Going into district play last year, Tioga only scored 57 points total in those games. For the season, Tioga only scored 90 points. In the 5 games that they've played so far, they're averaging 39.8 points a game. They're averaging that. So basically, in just one, they have a game in non-district play. I want to make sure I get it right because we'll throw out a number, and I don't want to necessarily do that. But they beat somebody in non-district play, 65-12. That was Era. In that one game, they scored more points than they did in all of non-district last year. And they came close in another game because they won that one 56-0 against Electra. So in 2 of their games, this non-district one surpassed and one almost equaled what they did in all their games last year. So it's really hard to look at what they did last year against the team. Because it's obviously a new coaching staff, doing some different things. People are healthy, because that was an issue last year. But scores are not that indicative of what this game could potentially be. For the actual black and white, Tioga has lost 7 straight district games going back to 2019. They did not win any district games last year, as they missed the playoffs. So this is a chance to get right off the bat, get a win, show you're going to be in the mix, because I'm sure there are a lot of people that say, yeah, you've done all this stuff in non-district, but let's see what you do in district, because you didn't win any district games last year. You only won one game the year before that just to make the playoffs. Your one win was in district play to get you to the playoffs. So I think there are probably some people that look at that and say, okay, let's prove it. And I think this is an interesting start for Trenton to be that opponent. And we'll see what Tioga can do. If they can get off to that fast start in district play, kind of announce their presence that, hey, we are gonna be in this mix for a playoff bid this time around. One team that is trying to get their first win, not only in district but in the season, is Tom Bean. They're going to be hosting Alvord, but this game will be played in Bells. The renovations at Tomcat Stadium are still ongoing. So this is the second game that had to be moved. They played at Trenton last time. They're playing at Bells this week. Since Bells is going to be on the road at Blue Ridge, although Trenton's on the road too, but I don't know. At this point, I think that you're just trying to find places to play. It stinks for these kids, especially for seniors, to be able to play at home. It hadn't worked out. They played a bunch of their games early on the road, hoping to be ready to have it set to go late September, and that hasn't worked out. I think they're hoping to maybe try to get at least one of these last games at home. So hopefully that can happen. But this game is going to be at Bell's. So if you're going to watch Tom Bean, don't go to Tom Bean. Go to Bell's. Normal time 7:30. But Tom Bean is 0-4. They did not play this last week. Alvord is 3-2. They did play last week. They won 55-6 against Chico. This was a game last year. A bit of a shootout last year, 50-34. Alvord was able to get the win. And they have not really. They've been consistently inconsistent so far this season. Alvord has. They've alternated wins and losses. So they won and they lost. Then they won, then they lost, and they won last week. So if that pattern holds, this is a win for Tom Bean. So maybe that might be a good sign. But Tom Bean has struggled offensively. They only have 2 touchdowns in their last 3 games. And so it's going to be interesting to see if they can be in the mix. Again, this was the team last year. They went into their last game of the season with an opportunity to get into the playoffs, but they came up short against Collinsville. So I don't know if this is a game that might tell us anything about this. Alvord finished second last year. For those that don't remember, Lindsay won the district. We'll talk about them in a second. But Alvord was second. Trenton was third and Collinsville was fourth. I think that's right. But those were the 4 playoff teams. So Tom Bean just missed out. And we'll see what they can do after their week off. Maybe they had a chance to figure out some things, maybe make some changes, add some stuff maybe that they hadn't had a chance to really work on, but they had the extra week, so we'll see what happens when Tom Bean takes on Alvord in that game again at Bell's on Friday night to go see them in 5-2A play. And then the last game, Collinsville will be going to Lindsay. Lindsay did not play last week. Collinsville did play. They lost against Munster 56-13. Munster's ranked in the top 10 in the state in 2A Division 2, and that is a common opponent. Watch because obviously Munster Lindsay play every year. Those rivals next door to each other. Back in week 2, Lindsay lost that match at 40-7. So 56-13, 40-7. Is that somewhat close if you want to compare scores? I don't know. Obviously, Collinsville's loss is a little worse, but they scored more points. Does that mean anything? Obviously, dealing with Lindsay, you've got to deal with Colt Shuckers at quarterback. He makes them go. They lost a lot to graduation, but he's still there, and so I think this could be an aerial assault because even though they lost this last week 56-13. Collinsville wasn't shy about throwing the ball around. Logan Jenkins was 20 of 40, 220 yards, hit some long passes. Rylan Newman had 4 catches for 90 yards and a touchdown. Carter Scott had 4 for 45 and a touchdown. Nathan Bocanegra had 6 for 43 and a touchdown. Garrett Trevino had a pair of catches. They picked up 43 yards, so he had some big chunk plays on his catches. They just were unable to stop Munster on the ground. Which I don't think Lindsay's going to want to do. Lindsay wants to throw the ball just based on what they've done in the past. And again, this is they're both 2-3. I don't think that means anything in the long run. Collinsville was trying to enter district play on a 3-game winning streak. Obviously, adding Munster as your extra game was not going to help in that regard. But this could be interesting. I don't know. I mean, I feel like you can say Lindsay is the favorite until somebody knocks them off. They're the favorite to repeat as the district champ. But I really think, and I've talked to some of the coaches in this district, I really think it's wide open. I think, I think obviously Tioga has improved. I think some other people that lost some pieces to graduation, it's not the same. It's not the same teams that you're dealing with last year. And I legit think that you have, maybe Tom Bean is the only one that probably can't say we have a chance. But you have 3 teams that have the same record at 2-3. Trenton's at 3-1. Alvord's at 3-2. I mean, those are all pretty close. I mean, there's not a 5-0 sitting in here that's hey, you're coming to knock us off because we haven't lost yet. Kind of like Lindsay was kind of in that mode last year. They were putting up big scores and they proved it in district play to win the title. But I think it's wide open and we might. I don't know if we'll get a good look at that the first week. I think next week is gonna really sort of tell a tale in this district. Just because I think the matchups are a little more interesting, especially that Alvord-Collinsville matchup, which was really close last year. Collinsville came up short, but we'll talk about all those games next week. We'll see what happens this week. Week 7, it is here. Thanks for tuning in as always. I appreciate the people who support the paper, support the podcast, support me in trying to bring you the best of the high school, not just football scene, but everything as we are, volleyball playoffs are about to start up here in the next couple weeks. The second half of district play is upon us for volleyball. And before you know it, basketball will be kicking off, and it'll be nonstop probably till June, and we'll probably have some softball and baseball teams run deep. So I appreciate all the support that you guys give. Enjoy the games. Apparently it's going to be hot again this weekend. I don't know what happened. I thought we had good football weather. We did for one weekend. Maybe it'll get a little bit cooler by the time the kickoff happens this week. But enjoy your games. Stay safe out there, and we'll talk to you next week.